So now that we know we need a hashed password and a salt in the database, let's go and create it. So we'll start by just changing the name right here of our current password. We'll just change that into actually being a hashed password because again, we don't want the plain password to be saved in the database. I also want to add one more thing again, that's going to be a string, and I want a salt in the database as well. So now we change the database setup right here very easily. The next thing I want to change is the auth user, because when I kind of work with the user in the model now, we also need to have more information on the user. Again, I would like the user to show me the hashed password again as a string, but I also want the user to actually have access to the salt, but that's going to be as a byte array. So let's add the hashed password right there and add another property right here as a byte array, because that's actually how I'm going to use the salt. Instead of showing it as an actual string, it's going to be a byte array. So we're going to have to figure out how we can convert a password salt string into a byte array that we're going to use later right here. So the models are now different, and later they'll get even further from each other when we start having permissions. So even though you have auth user and auth user entity, they're not the same thing. This is a model and this is actually a database entity right here. Good. We'll jump into our auth repository right here and have a look, and that just uses the hashed password right now. I want to change this because in the future we're not going to actually find user and password like we did earlier. Instead, what I want to be able to do is actually make a new method right here so we can just find the user we're looking for with the username. Let's start in the interface right here to say we want to be able to find an actual user. So we'll say auth user right here, that's what we want back. It's just going to be find user, and the only thing I want to pass in is going to be a string username. And again, the reason is that now I'm going to actually change the way that I communicate with an actual database right here. So this will be gone when we're done. I don't want to start finding users in the auth user repository right here. Let's go down to the user repository and then change that, because now it kind of says I need to implement the find user now in my repository. And as I said, instead of looking for a certain user by looking both at password and username, in the future I just want to find a user by just looking at the actual username itself. So we'll just copy this for now and put that down here. There we go. And then we will find a user only by the username now, not actually about both username and password. There we go. And if there's actually not an entity, we'll say return null. If there is an entity, we'll start actually adding both the username, but we'll also add the password right here. So in this case, the hashed password right here will be the hashed password that we're getting from the entity, like this. We also need to kind of get our salt here, but the salt is a byte array. So what we'll do is we'll say entity.salt to get the actual salt as a string, and then encoding it, we can actually convert it right here into a byte array using the ASCII encoder right here, like this. And I just want to use that package, implement the missing reference. So now we actually take the salt from a string and encode it into an actual byte array. So now we find user, and we actually convert it into an auth user that has the same information as in the database, except the salt is now a byte array, and we now have a find user available. I'll go back to my auth service right here, and actually instead of calling login in the future, I just want to call find user like this to get a user back. I just want to pass in the username and call the repositories find user right here. There we go. I can also call this get user like this. And then again, we need to convert our signature a little bit in our interface. So I'll go back to the iAuth service right here. iAuth user service, there we go. And instead of having this interface now, we'll change it into getting user like this. And then all we need to do to kind of complete this is to, as the final thing, go down to our security service and actually say get user here instead, and passing in only the username for now. So now we have a user available again. And now the user, of course, doesn't have any information about the hashed password or anything yet. And we'll make that in the next lesson, because I don't want to make this lesson too long. But I just made a way so that instead of actually getting a user and passing in the password right away, we can instead now get the user, and that user will tell us what his hash password is, what his salt is, and then using this password, we can now help next lesson to kind of convert from a plain password into a hashed password using the salt, and then comparing the actual password in the database with the password, salt, and plain password right here. So that's what we're going to do next lesson. Let's just end it right here, and next lesson we'll try and do the final part of this logging in.